Hey everyone, if you're here with us today, I bet you're thinking about how to get better at understanding English, like when someone's talking really fast or using slang, or maybe those accents that sound like a whole other language.
Yeah, that's it. It can be pretty frustrating sometimes.
Hmm.
You want to understand, but it feels like there's this wall.
Exactly. So
Uh,
today we're doing a deep dive into how to make English listening easier. We've got a bunch of articles, some research, even some personal stories to help us out.
it's not about instantly understanding everything perfectly. It's more like we're building up your listening muscles so you get stronger and more confident over time.
Okay, I like that idea. But how does that actually work? I mean, how does that actually help me understand real English better?
Well, you know how we usually jump into learning English by memorizing tons of words or grammar rules?
Right, flashcards and textbooks.
Yeah. But actually, linguists,
Hmm.
these experts in language, they think listening is the real key. It's like the foundation.
Really? So listening is more important than all that other stuff.
Kind of. Think about how babies learn language. They don't study grammar books. They just listen to everyone around them, and they pick it up naturally.
So you're saying I should just watch a ton of English movies and TV shows?
We'll get to those fun strategies in a bit. But first, we need to talk about the things that make English listening hard. The things that make you feel stuck.
Okay. You mean like when people talk super fast and use all those slang words, I have no idea what they mean.
Exactly. And all those different accents.
Yeah. Sometimes it feels like everyone has their own special way of speaking English.
It's true. But that's also what makes English so interesting. It's spoken all over the world. So there are all these cool variations.
I guess that makes sense. But it's still tough when you're trying to understand. So let's start with the speed thing. Any tips for someone who feels like native speakers are wrapping their sentences?
The good news is you don't have to understand everything at native speed right away.
Hmm.
It's like training for a marathon. You wouldn't try to sprint the whole distance on your first day, right?
Definitely not.
Your brain is actually amazing. It can adapt to different speaking speeds, but you got to give it time and practice.
So it's like going to the gym, but for my ears.
Exactly. And there are tons of resources where you can actually control the speed.
Hmm.
You can slow things down. YouTube podcasts, even some language learning apps have this feature.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that speed control before.
Start slow and comfortable. Then as you get used to it, you can bump up the speed bit by bit. It's like leveling up in a game.
That's a good way to think about it. I remember when I started learning Spanish, watching TV shows at 75% speed was a lifesaver. But what about those tricky slang words and idioms? It feels like I need a secret decoder ring.
I know what you mean. Slang and idioms are tough because they're not always literal. You can just translate them word for word.
Right, it's like they have a whole other meaning hidden inside.
They're like the spices in language. They
Yeah.
add flavor and make it sound more natural. But yeah, they can be confusing if you're not used to them.
So how do you learn all those slang words and idioms? Do I need to like hang out with cool kids and take notes?
Well, hanging out with native speakers is definitely helpful. But there's a less awkward way. You can learn a lot by immersing yourself in real English content, like watching TV shows, movies, even reality shows.
So I shouldn't just be hitting the textbooks.
Textbooks are good for the basics, but to really get slang and idioms, you need to hear them being used in context. It's like learning to cook. You can read all the recipes, but you got to get in the kitchen and actually make the food.
Makes sense. I'm a big fan of watching shows with subtitles. It's like having a built-in translator, especially when those slang words fly by.
Subtitles can be great, especially at first. But they can also become a crutch, like training wheels on a bike. They're helpful at the beginning, but eventually you got to take them off to really ride on your own.
That's true. I guess I do rely on subtitles a lot, so how do you get to that point where you can understand without them?
It takes practice. Train your ears to focus on the sounds of English. Start with subtitles in your native language. Then, when you feel ready, switch to English subtitles. Eventually, you'll be surprised how much you can understand without any visual help at all.
Okay, challenge accepted. But there's one more thing. Accents. They really trip me up. Sometimes it feels like every English speaker has their own unique dialect.
Well, you're not wrong. English has so many different accents.
Hmm.
It's spoken in so many countries, and each place has its own way of speaking.
That's pretty cool when you think about it. But it's also a bit overwhelming. So how do we train our ears to decode these accent mysteries? Do I need to travel the globe?
You don't need a passport, just a good internet connection.
Yeah.
There are tons of online resources where you can listen to different accents. You can find podcasts, videos, interviews, all sorts of stuff.
So I can explore the world of English accents from my couch. That sounds way more comfortable than backpacking across continents.
Exactly. And remember, It's okay to start with the accents that are easiest for you. If American English is comfortable, try British next, then maybe Australian or South African, whatever interests you.
That makes sense. Start simple and build from there, just like with everything else we've talked about.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay, so we've talked about the big three challenges: speed slang and accents. Now let's get into the good stuff. The actionable tips and strategies that can actually help us improve our English listening.
I'm glad you asked, because we're about to dive into some really cool stuff.
Awesome. I'm ready to go from listening zero to hero. What's first on the list?
Well, before we jump into specific resources, let's talk about a super important skill that often gets overlooked: active listening.
Active listening, I've heard that term before, but I'm not sure I really understand it. What does it mean when we're talking about learning English?
It means you're not just passively hearing words. You're
Right.
actively engaging with what's being said. You're thinking about the meaning. You're paying attention to the nuances. It's like being a detective trying to solve a mystery.
A language detective. I
Yeah.
like that. So how do we become master language detectives?
There are a few key techniques. First, try to predict what the speaker might say next. This keeps your brain active and engaged.
So I should be thinking ahead, like trying to guess where the conversation is going.
Exactly. It's like solving a puzzle, but
Uh-huh.
with language.
Cool. What else?
Pay attention to those key words, the words that carry the most important information in a sentence. And notice how the speaker's voice changes their tone and intonation. Are they excited? Are they being sarcastic? These are all clues that can help you understand the real meaning.
It's like reading between the lines, but with your ears.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to take notes. Jot down any unfamiliar words or phrases so you can look them up later. It's a great way to expand your vocabulary.
I'm a big note taker. It helps me remember things and makes me feel more involved.
It's a super helpful strategy. Here's another one. After you listen to something, try summarizing it in your own words. It helps you process the information and see if there are any gaps in your understanding.
Summarizing, like hitting the save button on your brain.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, I'm feeling pretty pumped about active listening now. But what about specific resources? What are some tools we can use to really build up those listening muscles?
I'm glad you asked, because that's what we'll be diving into next. Okay, so let's talk about podcasts. They're like a goldmine for language learners.
I love podcasts. I listen to them all the time. But how can they specifically help with my English listening?
Well, podcasts are basically like having a conversation with someone. They're unscripted and natural, so you get to hear real people talking about all sorts of things.
That makes sense. But wouldn't it be hard to understand if they're using slang and idioms and talking fast?
It can be challenging,
Yeah.
but that's also the beauty of it. You're exposed to real English as it's spoken, not just textbook language.
Mhm.
And the more you listen, the more you'll start to pick up on those nuances.
Okay, I see your point.
Yeah.
So where do I even find these magical podcasts?
Oh, there are tons of platforms. Spotify, Audible, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, you name it. And the best part is, there are podcasts for literally every interest you can think of.
Because I can learn English while geeking out on my favorite topics.
Exactly. Whether you're into true crime, history, science, comedy, business, whatever, there's a podcast out there for you.
This is awesome. I'm already feeling inspired to go on a podcast hunt. But what about those times when I want to just relax and escape into a good story? Can audiobooks help with English listening too?
Definitely, audiobooks are like movies for your ears. They can transport you to different worlds and immerse you in the language.
I love that imagery. But I've tried audiobooks before, and sometimes I find it hard to stay focused. Any tips for making the most of the experience?
Sure. One thing you can try is choosing audiobooks that are narrated by professional voice actors. They're trained to enunciate clearly and use expressive tones, so it's easier to follow along.
That's a good idea. What about the book itself? Should I choose something I've already read in my native language?
That can be helpful, especially at first, because you'll already be familiar with the plot and characters, so you can focus more on the language.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. Now, I've heard about this technique called shadowing, and it sounds kind of intense. Can you explain what it is and how it can help with English listening?
Shadowing is basically mimicking what you hear. So you listen to a sentence or a phrase, and then you repeat it out loud, trying to match the speaker's pronunciation rhythm and intonation.
So it's like you're their shadow, trying to copy their every move, but with language.
Exactly. I feel a bit awkward at first, but it's super effective. It forces you to pay close attention to the sounds of English and train your mouth to produce them correctly.
I can see how that would be helpful for both listening and speaking. Any tips for beginners?
Start with short, simple sentences or phrases and gradually work your way up to more complex stuff. You can use anything as your shadowing material: podcasts, audiobooks, even YouTube videos.
Cool. So many options. This is great. I'm definitely going to try shadowing. Speaking of YouTube, what about watching videos in general? Can that help with English listening?
Absolutely. Videos are fantastic because they combine audio and visual elements, so you get more context, which can make it easier to understand what's being said.
So it's like having a cheat sheet built right in.
Kind of. And there's so many different types of videos to choose from. Movies, TV shows, documentaries, educational content, you name it.
Any recommendations for genres that are particularly good for English learners?
I would say start with things that have clear dialogue and a slower pace, like comedy shows, documentaries, or educational YouTube channels. You don't want to jump into something super fast-paced and action-packed right away.
Right. That makes sense. It's like starting with the bunny slope before you hit the black diamond.
Mm.
Okay, so we've talked about podcasts, audiobooks, videos, all great stuff. But what about actually talking to real people? Is there a way to practice English listening in a more interactive setting?
Definitely. And this is where online communities come in. There are tons of platforms and groups specifically designed for language learning and exchange. You can connect with native English speakers from all over the world and practice your listening skills in a real-life setting.
So it's like having pen pals, but with instant messaging and video calls.
Exactly. You can chat, type voice messages, even have live video conversations. It's a great way to get exposure to different accents and learn about different cultures.
Wow, that sounds amazing. Any specific platforms you recommend?
HelloTalk and Tandem are popular ones. They're specifically designed for language exchange, so you can connect with native speakers who are learning your language and help each other out.
I love that idea. It's a win-win situation. And what if I'm not quite ready for full-on conversations? Are there any baby steps I can take?
Sure. You can start by sending voice messages or just text chatting. It's a good way to dip your toes in the water and build up your confidence. Yeah. And don't forget about Facebook groups. There are tons of groups dedicated to English learning where you can ask questions, share resources, and connect with other learners.
That's a good point. Facebook groups can be a great support system. Okay, before we move on, I have to ask about music because it's one of my favorite ways to engage with English.
Music is amazing. It's like a universal language that can connect people from all over the world, and it's a fantastic tool for language learning.
I find myself singing along to English songs even if I don't understand all the words. It's like my brain is absorbing the sounds and rhythms subconsciously.
You're exactly right. Music has this incredible power to bypass our conscious filters and tap into our emotions. And it's packed with colloquialisms, slang idioms, all those fun things that make language come alive.
So I can learn to speak English like a native by listening to my favorite bands.
Well, it's not that simple.
Yeah.
But music can definitely help you pick up on natural pronunciation, rhythm, and intonation. And it can expose you to a wider range of vocabulary.
Okay, I'm sold on the power of music, but how can I make sure I'm actually learning from it and not just mindlessly singing along?
Look up the lyrics as you listen and try to understand the meaning behind the words. You can even use apps like Lyrics Training, which turned learning new vocabulary into a game.
Lyrics training. That sounds fun. I'll have to check it out. Okay, so we've got all these amazing resources, podcasts, audiobooks, videos, online communities, music. It's like a language learning buffet. But with so many choices, it can be overwhelming. How do we know where to start and how to create a plan that actually works?
That's a great question. And that's what we'll be diving into next. We'll talk about how to create a personalized listening plan that fits your individual needs and goals.
All right, so we've got this awesome toolkit now, right? Podcasts, audiobooks, videos, online communities, even music. It's like we're loaded up and ready to go. But how do we actually use all this stuff? How do we make a plan that actually helps us improve?
That's the key, isn't it? It's not just about having the resources. It's about using them in a way that works for you. It's like having all the ingredients for a delicious meal, but you still need a recipe to put it all together.
I like that analogy. So what's the recipe for success when it comes to English listening?
Well, first of all, you don't need to overhaul your entire life. You don't need to spend hours and hours every day just listening to English.
That's good to hear. Because I do have other things to do, you know.
Of course. It's all about finding those little pockets of time in your day where you can fit in some English listening. Like think about your commute, your workout, even just doing chores around the house.
So I can turn those everyday activities into language learning opportunities.
Exactly. It's like sneaking in a workout without even realizing it.
I'm all about that sneaky learning. But how much listening should we aim for each day? Is there a magic number?
There's no magic number. But even just 15 minutes a day can make a big difference. The key is consistency.
Consistency. Got it. So it's better to listen for a short time every day than to try and cram a whole bunch of listening into one day.
Exactly. It's like going to the gym. It's better to work out regularly than to try and do a marathon all at once.
That makes sense. What about creating a weekly schedule? Would that help?
A schedule can be really helpful.
Mm.
It can keep you organized and on track. You could dedicate certain days to specific activities, like maybe Mondays and Wednesdays are for podcasts, Tuesdays and Thursdays are for watching a TV show, and the weekend is for relaxing with an audiobook or some music.
I like that idea. It's like having a roadmap for my language learning journey.
Exactly. And remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. You can adjust it as you go along and find what works best for you.
Okay, so we've got our resources, we've got our schedule, but what if I hit a roadblock? What if I'm listening to something and I just can't understand what's being said?
That's totally normal.
Mm.
Don't get discouraged. It happens to everyone. The important thing is to not give up.
So what should I do if I'm feeling stuck?
First of all, don't be afraid to slow down the playback speed, or use subtitles, or even look up a transcript if you're really struggling. You can also try focusing on just understanding the main idea instead of every single word.
So it's okay to not understand everything perfectly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No one understands everything perfectly all the time, even native speakers. And remember, the more you listen, the easier it will become. It's like anything else. The more you practice, the better you get.
That's reassuring to hear. I feel like this whole deep dive has been such a game changer. It's given me a whole new perspective on English listening, and I'm actually excited to start putting all these tips into action.
That's great to hear. And remember, you're not alone in this. There's a whole community of language learners out there who are going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Connect with other learners, share your experiences, support each other. It can make a big difference.
Absolutely. It's like we're all on this journey together. So to everyone out there who's trying to improve their English listening, keep going. Don't give up. And have fun with it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap on our deep dive into mastering English listening skills. We hope you've learned some valuable tips and strategies that you can start using right away. Remember, the key is to be consistent, be patient, and most importantly, have fun with it. Thanks for joining us, and happy listening.